Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Race, Rights, and Rifles, The Origins of the NRA and Contemporary Gun Culture, by Alexandra Filindra, narrated by Peter Berkrot. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to tables and figures present in the print and e-book formats of the book. The soldier is, at the same time, a citizen. He thinks of his country and of his party. He talks politics. He reads almost every day the gazettes brought to the camps by intrepid little carriers. He often sends a correspondence to the journals. He communicates military impressions to the senators, and his plans of campaign to chiefs the most elevated in grade. Lieutenant Colonel Ferdinand Lecomte, Report on the U.S. Civil War, 1862. Negro manhood says, I am an American citizen. Modern democracy says, you are not. Negro manhood says, I demand all my rights, civil and political. Modern democracy says, you have no rights except what I choose to give you. Negro manhood says, I will exercise the rights vouchsafed. Modern democracy says, if you do, I will mob and murder you. Benjamin Tanner, Christian Advocate Editor, 1868. We cannot outnumber the Negroes, and so we must either outcheat, outcount, or outshoot them. Claude Kitchen, Democratic Party Executive Committeeman, Laurinburg, North Carolina, Political Rally, 1898. Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. President Donald J. Trump, Presidential Debate, September 29, 2020. Introduction. From My Cold, Dead Hands. In May 2000, at the National Rifle Association's, NRA, National Convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, the organization's president, Charlton Heston, concluded his speech by clutching a handcrafted flintlock rifle and bellowing defiantly, "From my cold, dead hands." The image has become iconic, a symbol of Americanism and patriotism to some, and militarism to others. That night, like so many more that followed over the next several years, Heston would channel the ancient heroes that made him famous. Once again he was a Roman legionnaire, raising his sword and fighting to the death for freedom and the Republic, much as the infamous emperors of yore did in ancient Rome. Corrupt elites in Washington, D.C. and Hollywood were plotting to subvert treasured American institutions, and the aging Cincinnatus had once again put down his plow. He had enlisted as sentinel to guard the gates of the Republic. He was warning its people of the mortal danger that lay within. Each time Heston raised his shaking arm, fist tight around the elegantly carved body of the rifle, the crowd ate it up, enthusiastically applauding in delight. Humans are not a perfect species, capable of coexisting under everlasting peace, the NRA elder proclaimed. Humans are egotistical, corruptible, vengeful, sometimes even a bit power-mad. Given the frailty of human nature and the temptation of vice, concentrating power in the hands of the few was dangerous for institutions. A nation where police, military, and government agents are allowed the force of arms, and individual citizens are not, is vulnerable to corruption. A political class that controls lethal force is empowered to dominate the people rather than represent their interests. It becomes Big Brother knows best, its authority enforced with powder and ball. Since humans are not always virtuous, preserving democratic freedom requires active and conscious effort. It takes courage, Heston told his rapt audience. It takes constant alertness to politics. The red, white, and blue stand for valor, purity, and vigilance. It is the courage displayed by soldiers in distant trenches. For the aging warrior of the NRA, an armed citizenry embodied manly courage and honor. Muskets in the hands of farmers, not trained soldiers or police, is what enabled those who assembled at Concord Bridge to stand their ground, as if to say, "Don't tread on me." This virtue and political responsibility, Heston tells us, develops when young men look upon the ownership of tools, ranging from a rifle to a spear to a bow and arrows, as a rite of passage into manhood and the adult world. Through training with arms, a boy makes a transition to responsible manhood. For Heston and the NRA, the right to bear arms, codified in the U.S. Constitution's Second Amendment, is the country's first freedom, an absolute right. The right to keep and bear arms is the only right that allows rights to exist at all. It is the right that creates the absolute capacity to live without fear. The right to bear arms makes us equal when divisions of power are assessed. To those who desire a cultural hierarchy with an elite in power, a gun is a threatening symbol of equality of power. Emphasis in the original. If citizens are barred from owning firearms, all other freedoms, including the rights to vote, worship, and speak freely, become vulnerable to elite repression. What makes Americans virtuous, according to Heston, is their commitment to a shared set of values and a common identity, a shared understanding of peoplehood. These values are encoded in the country's founding documents. They were developed by a bunch of wise, old, dead white guys, people who shared Heston's and the model NRA members' beliefs and physical features, even their age. These values are not negotiable or subject to interpretation. Much like the Ten Commandments, they are written in stone, and it is absurd to even try to analyze them. The expression of peoplehood inheres in the America that Americans built. It is the America where you could pray without feeling naive, love without being kinky, sing without profanity, be white without feeling guilty, own a gun without shame, and raise your hand to say so without apology. This masculine, Christian, and proudly, unapologetically white America, Heston believed, is what guns in civilian hands and the courage to use them are meant to protect. Heston warns that cosmopolitan and multicultural political elites introduce corruption into the soul of the Republic. By attacking traditional notions of what it means to be an American, these forces are not truly striving for political equality, but branding many Americans as lesser citizens, degrading their status and contributions to the polity. We are in danger of becoming numbed by the barrage of cultural messages being hurled at us by the elitists, messages that make the majority feel like they're the minority, he warned. These forces assault American political virtue and rob citizens of the courage of their convictions. Our pride in who we are and what we believe has been ridiculed, ransacked, and plundered. The consequences of this assault on tradition are dire for the Republic. Citizens have become willing to tolerate the erosion of our freedom. Heaven help the God-fearing, law-abiding, Caucasian, middle-class Protestant, or even worse, evangelical Christian, the Midwestern or Southern, or even worse, rural hunter, apparently straight or admitted heterosexual gun-owning, or even worse, NRA card-carrying, average working stiff, or even worse still, male working stiff, because not only do you not count, you're a downright obstacle to social progress. Heston's ideology, that combines faith in the ability of gun owners to discern what is good for America with a deep suspicion of the national government and its motivations, is antithetical to modern notions of state organization. However, this ideology is popular with his NRA audience, whose members jumped to their feet and applauded Heston at every event he headlined. This ideology has also been popular with militia groups, from the 1990s extremists in Michigan and the West to modern-day Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. Elements of this culture are reflected in modern white Christian nationalism. These groups are not alone in embracing these ideas. In May and June 2021, I fielded a nationally representative survey and found that almost 4 in 10 contemporary white Americans share this worldview, especially, but not exclusively, Republicans. They believe that being a true American citizen combines patriarchal authority, Christianity, whiteness, and militarized political engagement, especially owning firearms. Almost 2/3, 60% of white people who embrace this ideology prioritize the right to bear arms over other rights, much as Heston did. To them it is the first freedom. Also, like Heston, more than half, 54% of white people who embrace this worldview believe that the government is so powerful that people need guns to protect themselves from it. At the same time, supporters of this ideology endorse draconian policies that empower citizens to act as political vigilantes. 71% believe that there should be laws that protect citizens who shoot at protesters whom they think are violent and threatening private property, practically endorsing immunity for vigilantism. Similarly, 43% are so concerned with protecting their white heritage that they support laws that classify as terrorism any activity that promotes beliefs and ideologies that criticize America's white and European heritage. More ominously, 46% of white people who share Heston's view of politics believe that the QAnon conspiracy, whose adherents attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, is a group of patriots dedicated to exposing the corruption of the deep state. The vast majority, 78%, judge twice-impeached Donald Trump among the country's best presidents. The historical record suggests that militarized conceptions of political membership, like those documented in the survey, can influence citizens' political behavior in ways detrimental to democracy. More than once, groups of Americans have taken up arms against their political institutions. The most devastating such event was the Civil War, but it is far from the only one. American history is marked by vigilante violence, targeting people of color, armed labor strife, citizen rebellions, political assassinations, and at least one successful armed overthrow of an elected government. The January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol may have been shocking to many and a terrible omen for the future of American politics, but it is not unique in character or intent. But where does this ideology that links suspicion of government authority, human fallibility, martial virtue, and Eurocentric values come from? And why has it captivated so many people, even motivating an attack on the U.S. Capitol? Ideological traditions in American politics. Many contemporary observers, including scholars, ordinary people, and members of the NRA itself, believe that American gun culture is closely tied to American traditions of individualism and libertarianism. Such accounts of gun culture emphasize the role of beliefs grounded in self-sufficiency, hard work, and moral independence as the foundation of people's commitment to gun rights. Other observers suggest it is a gun-centric ideology that the NRA created. Yet, recent U.S. Supreme Court decisions notwithstanding, historians and political theorists agree that little connects liberal individualism to America's gun culture. I argue that this gun-centric ideology rests on a very old but different foundation. In this book, I will show that the NRA's worldview is the modern expression of an ideological system that fused the classical Republican citizen-soldier ideal, the foundation of democracy, with American white male supremacy. I call this mixed ideology ascriptive martial republicanism, ascriptive republicanism for short, because it weights martial expressions of citizenship proportionately more than civic participation, and recognizes as true citizens only those who fulfill specific identity-based criteria, key among them being male and white. By worldview or ideology, I mean a set of ideas that have some internal coherence and seek to describe and explain the nature of the social world, alternately called causal stories, political narratives, legitimizing myths, stories of peoplehood, constitutive norms, or political languages. These moral constructs help us determine what behavior should be punished or rewarded, who deserves access to collectively held resources, and who should be offered full social, economic, and political rights, and why. They answer questions about what is just, fair, and legitimate. Ideologies tend to undergird institutions and laws that enable societies to incentivize and reward conformity and punish deviance. In short, these ideas justify a polity's structural organization and social hierarchy. Ideologies consist of repertoires involving symbols, myths, and narratives that produce and reproduce how members of a culture define social and moral worth. This language gives meaning to social action and creates a sense of common cause and community among participants. This political vernacular is not random. It is deeply embedded in the broader culture that gives rise to social movements. Intimate knowledge of the culture is required to understand the relative significance of the political meanings encoded in these stories, and to be mobilized by them. Historians have observed that political narratives often create usable history or a usable past. They selectively emphasize, embellish, or silence the historical record in ways that allow groups to create positive, diachronic links between a heroic past and today's political actors. This continuity through time allows groups to make claims to moral authority for their actions and political goals today, based on their claims to be the true heirs or true representatives of a political community. As human beings, we have an innate disposition to understand the world in normative terms, and, often, to rely on affect and emotion rather than reason in our social judgments. As a result, expressing interests and justifying social and political privileges in the language of morality and values has many benefits. Translating interests into the language of values can help increase issue salience. The point of contention is no longer material. Rather, it is the defense of closely held moral standards. Transforming a political argument into a moral one also forecloses many response options, allowing the state a lot less latitude in dealing with moralized issues. At the same time, this process can transform petty grievances into grand causes. If moral intuition is innate, moral arguments are more accessible than interest-based arguments to broad audiences. People are more likely to have strong negative emotional responses to perceived violations of society's moral code, and these emotions can help sustain mobilization. This translation process is not necessarily strategic, although political elites can and do behave instrumentally. Classical liberalism understands political membership based on independence, political equality, and negative liberty, or the absence of government involvement in citizens' daily lives. The institutions that Americans built are supposed to reflect this ideal. They are described as egalitarian, voluntary, and requiring minimal government involvement. Public authority is responsible for keeping the community safe from internal and external foes and protecting people's rights to property. In a liberal polity, citizens do not have duties to the community. Their primary responsibility is to pursue their self-interest. Although classical liberalism assigns a minimal role to state authority, little in this theory suggests that as citizens, individuals are duty-bound to bear arms and be vigilant against political corruption, or that they have any civic duties at all. In fact, the classical liberal state's primary responsibility is to provide security of life and property through professionalized institutions, such as courts, police, and the military, so that citizens can remain free to pursue their economic self-interest. Classical liberalism views citizens as individuals who pursue personal economic gain, rather than splitting their time and attention between private and public functions. Liberals, or what today we call libertarians, are not likely to associate good citizenship with gun ownership and using arms to stand up to government corruption. Civic duty and collective responsibility are not terms commonly associated with liberal thought. Liberals do not generally think of themselves as sentries who stand guard at the gates of the Republic, like NRA leaders Charlton Heston and Wayne LaPierre have done for decades. But this language of duty and civic obligation is everywhere you look in the gun world. The gun rights discourse emphasizes a right to protect against government tyranny and a civic responsibility to do so using both the ballot and the bullet. The NRA's flagship publication, The American Rifleman, is brimming with exhortations to civic duty and the necessity for military preparedness among civilian men. The most sacred duty of the citizen, declared the magazine, was the protection of the freeman's ballot against internal and external enemies. In this view, no moral law or common law can entirely delegate this right and duty to mercenaries and professional soldiers. The emphasis on manhood and honor pervasive in the gun culture is another clue of an inconsistency between the egalitarianism inherent in liberal theory and contemporary gun narratives. Mostly, gun myths and narratives associate citizenship with men, not women. Even when gun narratives mention women, it is not as citizens with duties and obligations or as soldiers. Instead, women are mentioned as either the objects of men's sexual fantasies or victims of violence. NRA narratives also imply a racialized view of citizenship, focusing not just on men, but on white men. As I will examine later in this book, pictures of non-white people in NRA magazines are conspicuous in their absence. People of color are rarely, if ever, discussed in the context of political membership, as soldiers or citizens, or even voters. Where NRA narratives do imply race, it is usually in stories of how law-abiding citizens deter attacks by racialized others, thugs, criminals, felons, terrorists, or rioters. Native Americans are the perennial enemy, whose destruction is a source of the armed white man's honor. In this book, I will show how the militarized understandings of political membership prominent in NRA narratives and embraced by many white Americans fit within a broader ideology, one that I call ascriptive martial republicanism, that has its roots in the American Revolution. This ideology represents the syncretic combination of two worldviews that were influential at the time and remain so today: martial republicanism and white male supremacy. Martial republicanism is a system of thought associated with Aristotle, Cicero, and Machiavelli. It is an ideology that predates liberalism, a product of the Enlightenment, and the establishment of the modern nation-state. Martial republicanism emerged long before the Industrial Revolution and modern forms of warfare. In short, it is a very old idea. Unlike liberalism, which emphasized negative liberty, republicanism understood citizens as bearers of rights and duties. The duties of citizenship included political participation and military service. A good citizen would train at arms in times of peace, to be ready to distinguish himself as a hero in war. Much like Heston, Republican theorists believed that practicing with arms, or military preparedness, endowed male citizens with political virtue or honor, making them enlightened stewards of the public good in politics. Unlike liberalism, which emphasizes individual interests, republicanism has a robust understanding of the public good and differentiates it from private interests. Liberalism views the pursuit of self-interest as positive for society. For Republicans, though, pursuing personal gain is evidence of moral corruption and is therefore a threat to the republic. Virtuous citizens can differentiate between personal gain and the public good and subordinate their interests to the collective. Our country includes family, friends, and property, and should be preferred to them all, is how Republicans envisioned the relationship between the individual and the state. It was a man's willingness to embrace the public good and sacrifice his life for the nation that made him a virtuous decision-maker at the ballot box. A nation's independence and liberty thus depended on cultivating virtue in its citizens. Dependent citizens were destined for moral and physical slavery. The tracts of the founding era are replete with Republican arguments and narratives. The country's intellectual and political founders were very concerned about political virtue and how to inculcate and protect it. Benjamin Rush hoped that men would train to be Republican machines, selfless, rational, and unemotional protectors of the Republic. These themes were so central to the rhetoric of the early Republic that foreign observers of early American politics picked up on the importance of republicanism. Alexis de Tocqueville, a great admirer of the American democratic experiment, discussed American republicanism at length, extolling American civic involvement and commitment to military preparedness. He dedicated entire chapters to the American military tradition of the citizen soldier, and the country's refusal to establish a large professional army, which Republicans viewed as a source of corruption. Political, non-militarized Republican ideals, civic education, civic engagement, volunteerism, are central to several 20th century explanations of American democracy. For example, in The Civic Culture, a book that has influenced generations of social scientists, Gabriel Almond and Sidney Verba argued that American political culture is characterized by a strong sense of patriotism, social and political duty, and corresponding high levels of political and social participation. They viewed this civic culture as the apex of democracy. In this culture, citizens do not merely obey the law or focus exclusively on their interests. They view the law as central to preserving their social and individual commitments and actively shaping the polity. These ideals in relationships allow political members to sustain trust in each other and safeguard civil authority. Ideals focused on nonviolent political engagement, inclusivity, and respect for cultural others are also central to the discourse of the civil rights movement and the feminist movements of the mid-20th century. Republican ideology is thus the foundation of modern participatory democracy. As such, it carries the promise of inclusivity and can be enticing to majority groups and minorities alike. Its most inclusive forms suggest that any member of society who fulfills their obligations to the polity can be called a citizen and make claims against the state. Any human being, regardless of race, gender, class, sexual orientation, or religion, is entitled to full membership in the American polity if they hold up their end of the bargain, if they work hard, are independent, care about fellow citizens, contribute to society, pay their taxes, and vote. Indeed, this promise of inclusivity animated African American men and white women to use republicanism as a vehicle to achieve political rights. A top...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?